Yeah, welcome back everyone. So I didn't post for a long time because I was writing my book and that took a lot of time. I was allowed to use ChatGPT for editing later, which was a great help. I had first a professional editor, but the publisher was still saying that it was not good enough. And when I suggested that we can maybe use ChatGPT, they asked their colleagues or ethics people that they have, I don't know how you call that, and they said, yeah, as long as it is editing, it's okay. And it's really incredible what kind of progress we make, and I'm really worried that you don't need me anymore for explaining Hegel texts. Maybe it's more kind of a questioning what he really wants to say. I know that for my students, I already recommend ChatGPT for reading Hegel with that kind of help. But it's not always clear and it does not always clarify all the questions. Now, I made a video with Vimeo that we just want to listen to. It's Hegel explaining his philosophy to Goethe and Napoleon.
The dialectic is not merely a method, but the very movement of spirit itself, progressing through contradiction towards absolute knowing.
Okay, so what he says is that the dialectic is not just a method. Yeah, that's what we always think, oh, it's thesis, antithesis, synthesis. But it's more the real movement of something that we can observe. He calls that spirit, whatever that is. And it progresses to something that is knowing, and more particularly that is knowing itself, which is called absolute knowing. And this is what we should keep in mind when reading Hegel, that absolute knowing is a progression towards what he calls the true shape of truth. Now, what is the true shape of truth? Maybe we have to imagine it like the old definition of Aquinas, where we have an identity of intellect and thing. Now, the problem with these kind of correspondence theoretical concepts until today is always that you have two very different things. You have, for example, a word, table, and you have a real thing in reality. Now, how can they be identical with each other or have an adequatio? That's really difficult. In other words, the word is a universal and the table is something that is specific. It has some advantages that the word is universal. It's not just a name. It can be universally applied to all tables. So it somehow needs to be disconnected from what is the concrete table. But of course, it misses what it is. In other words, word is usually not a name. A name is something that should be only attached to this one thing. For example, this table A. Now, can we ever achieve that? Maybe not. But maybe Hegel finds something where the word and the thing are the same. And the idea is that that is the concept. So we need to achieve the concept of the concept. Here we can achieve an identity where the thing, the concept, is the same as the word, the concept. Now, however, how to achieve that by not just saying, oh, these are concepts? Well, the true shape in which truth exists can only be the science of a system of such truth. Now, why is that? Because each concept, again, is limited. When we have the universal concept of, for example, table, it never really reaches the table. And why should that be different when the concept tries to reach the concept itself? Now, Hegel's solution is that we need to organize a system that somehow directs us towards that kind of concept, to that kind of truth. Now, system is here a thought that certainly Kant has coined. It occurs before, of course, in the Enlightenment when they start writing these encyclopedias and they want to systematize all knowledge. But according to Kant, a system is not a mere rhapsody of knowledge, but all bits of knowledge organized with regard to one idea. And again, The one idea for Hegel is self-consciousness, particularly in the shape of concepts. To help bring philosophy closer to the form of science, to the goal where it can lay aside the title love of knowing and be actual knowing, that is what I have set myself to know. So Hegel wants to bring philosophy closer to such a scientific system, so that we don't only love knowledge, but that we actually know. And now he talks about something that is a very important term and that I don't fully understand and grasp: inner necessity. The inner necessity that knowing should be science lies in its nature, and only the systematic exposition of philosophy itself provides it. Now, why is it an inner necessity for knowing to become science, or that it should be science? Now, it seems to me that when I try to know something, I'm always skeptical. Like, do I really know that? What is the real ground for knowing it? So it seems to me that knowing always tries to reach deeper, but never reaches a final point, like in Plato. I know that regarding what knowledge is claimed to be, I don't know. Now, how can we actually get to knowledge? By accepting that knowledge is not just bound in a single word, in a single frame of reference, but that knowledge is probably a movement. I guess that's what he wants to say. Now he introduces, however, a second word, which is called external necessity. And external necessity is probably not the development of knowledge inside of our mind, but the development of knowledge throughout history. For example, we first had Kepler, then we had Newton, and then we had maybe Einstein, if that is the right connection. And each of them could only exist because there was a predecessor. Now, of course, Einstein would also have existed without Newton, but he wouldn't have become the famous physicist because there would have been nobody that he could have been building on. Probably Einstein would have been the Newton if Newton hadn't existed, so maybe we can think it like that. So the necessity here is probably not understood in the way that history had to develop the way it did. But we know that our current situation is based on these developments, for example, that we can identify, and without them we wouldn't be. Now, again, these are necessary conditions, not sufficient conditions. I guess that's what we should keep in mind. So far as so the external necessity, so far as it is grasped in a general way, setting aside accidental matters of person and motivation. So we really don't want to have this contingent stuff in there, right? Not like that somebody sometimes gets angry, but Napoleon, for example, in its real meaning. So and then it becomes the same as the inner necessity. Or in other words, it lies in the shape in which time sets forth the sequential existence of its moments. Now, and this here is very hard to understand in my mind. Maybe you say you have a very simple way of understanding that, then let me know. But for me, this is, okay, so we set aside the coincidental matters, and then we see something in nature that moves with necessity. Now, is that really necessity? I don't know. So, but I guess we can always say that I wouldn't have been born if my parents hadn't existed. I wouldn't have learned language if my parents and my social surroundings hadn't taught me these ideas. So I guess what Hegel hints to is that we try to understand history not just as a contingent series of events, like on a time frame. Yeah, this is like a very intuitive understanding that time is an arrow, and then we have contingent events on it. No, the question is, how are they actually related to each other with regard to necessity? And I guess that is what we try to reconstruct. So far so good, but now it becomes, of course, more complicated, of course, because it is Hegel. To show that now is the time for philosophy to be raised to the status of science would therefore be the only true justification of any effort that has this aim. For to do so would demonstrate the necessity of the aim, and would indeed be the accomplishing of it. And this is what I don't understand. This is really where my mind explodes. So we show that it is now the time for philosophy. Yeah, it's like he emphasizes now. Now we have to bring it to a science. So we can only do that if everything is prepared, so if the necessary conditions are met for getting towards the science, right? But that does not mean it's sufficient to get to a science. And he says, okay, this is the only true justification of any effort that has this aim. So I guess in a sense we have to show that now it is really possible that all the systems of knowledge or the fragments of knowledge that we had before are already arranged in a way that now we can achieve knowledge, not just a rhapsody, but really actual knowledge, not only loving it anymore. Yeah, so I guess this is what he says here, but I don't understand the last part, and that is that demonstrating the necessity of the aim would indeed be accomplishing it. So when I show that it is necessary to make philosophy a science, then philosophy is a science. Now, how do we have to understand that? I have an idea. I recorded this video before, but I couldn't solve it. But I have an idea. Maybe that kind of scientific spirit that I adapt when I say it's necessary that we make knowledge scientific brings us into the process, which will never reach its final end, which is dialectically always ongoing and never finishes. Yeah, I don't know what you think about that. Maybe that's a solution to this kind of paradox that I discovered here. Let me know in the comments what you think, whether you like that video or not, whether it helps you, whether we still have to record such videos in the time and age of ChatGPT, and whether I should go on reading paragraph 6 and not let another year pass by, because then it would take too long to get through the phenomenology of spirit. Anyway, thanks for watching. Live long, study more Hegel, and prosper.